A wealthy rancher saw a widow beaten daily by the town, until he took her as his bride. Martha had once lived a peaceful life with her husband on the edge of the small town. Their little house was modest but full of warmth. After her husband passed away suddenly, Martha's world seemed to collapse. She had no family nearby to lean on, and the townspeople, instead of offering sympathy, looked at her with suspicion. The streets that she had walked freely before now felt like a gauntlet. Whispers followed her wherever she went. People blamed her for her husband's death, as if grief alone could not take its toll. Each morning, Martha would wake before dawn, the cold sunlight barely filtering through the thin curtains of her small home. She would light a fire in the old stove, making tea, and quietly prepare herself for the day ahead. Life was no longer gentle. Every step outside her home required courage. Her neighbors avoided her, some sneering openly when they passed by. Children, taught by their parents, would point and giggle cruelly. Even at the market, where people usually came to exchange goods and gossip harmlessly, she felt the weight of judgment. Martha never complained aloud. She held herself tall, but her eyes carried the sadness of someone who had lost much and had little to lean on. She had learned to move silently through the world, avoiding confrontations, always careful of whom she passed or spoke to. Her routine became a shield. She learned which paths to take to avoid the most judgmental people, which shops she could enter without being humiliated, and which neighbors might throw cruel words over a fence. Despite the constant pressure, she kept herself busy. She tended to a small garden behind her house, growing vegetables that could supplement the little food she could afford. She kept her house tidy, her small world orderly, and found solace in the simple rhythms of daily chores. The townspeople, however, never allowed her peace. Each day there was some new insult, some small humiliation. A group of men would whisper rude comments from the street corner as she passed. Women in their tight-knit circles would sometimes stop and stare, murmuring judgments about how she should dress, how she should behave, how she should move through life. Children, repeating what they heard, would sometimes call after her, laughing cruelly. The accumulation of such small torments was exhausting. Yet Martha endured because there was no one else to fight for her. She had no protector, no friend strong enough to confront the town. Her resilience became quiet and steadfast, a silent rebellion against the world's cruelty. From a distance, Samuel watched these events unfold. He was a wealthy rancher, known and respected throughout the region. His ranch was large, stretching across acres of land, and he was a man used to authority and control. Samuel had lost his parents early in life and inherited the ranch, which meant he had grown accustomed to independence and solitude. Wealth and influence gave him power over many aspects of life, but it had not shielded him from loneliness. In the past, he had often walked along the outskirts of town, observing the lives of the people he both relied on and distanced himself from. On these walks, he had begun to notice Martha. At first, it was curiosity that drew his attention. The widow moved quietly, her head held high despite the cruelty aimed at her. There was a dignity in her suffering that caught his eye, a strength that others in town seemed too blind to recognize. He observed her from afar, noticing the way she avoided certain streets, the careful way she carried her basket of vegetables, the guarded manner in which she spoke to shopkeepers. Samuel felt a mix of admiration and concern. He had never known anyone like Martha, and the injustice of how she was treated stirred something inside him. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel continued to watch. He saw her face pale from worry, the weariness in her movements, the small ways she sought to protect herself. Sometimes she would stand in the market square, trying to bargain for vegetables or cloth, only to be mocked or ignored. Samuel noticed that her hands, though skilled in work, trembled slightly when she was confronted. He felt a growing responsibility, though he had never considered himself a savior. It was not charity that called to him. It was a sense of justice, a need to correct the wrongs he could not ignore. Martha, for her part, was not aware of Samuel's attention. Her focus was survival. Each day required careful planning. Each interaction demanded patience and strategy. She had learned to smile politely even when her heart ached, to nod and respond without giving an inch for cruelty to pierce her spirit. But sometimes, in the quiet moments at home, she allowed herself to break down. She would sit by the small window, looking out at the empty fields, wishing for someone to understand, for a friend, for even the smallest sign of kindness. The loneliness pressed on her heart, but she did not give up. Martha believed in maintaining her dignity, even when the world seemed to conspire against her. Samuel, seeing this, began to think about how he could help. He could not undo her losses, but perhaps he could provide protection or a chance for her to live without constant fear. He considered sending a servant to accompany her to town, or making small gestures that would signal to the townspeople that she was not to be mistreated. Yet he was cautious. He knew that overt action could provoke resentment, and he wanted Martha to feel safe, not endangered by his attention. His thoughts circled around her constantly, weighing possibilities and consequences. One day, Samuel observed a particularly harsh scene. Martha had gone to the market, carrying her small basket of produce. A group of young men cornered her near the fountain, jeering and mocking her as they threw insults that cut deeper than words. The townspeople nearby whispered and watched, but no one stepped forward. Samuel, standing at a distance, felt a surge of anger and protective instinct. Something inside him demanded action. He did not yet intervene, but he resolved that he could no longer be a passive observer. Martha's quiet endurance was admirable, but no one should have to suffer like this alone. From that day forward, Samuel began to plan small acts of kindness, though still from a distance. He would pay the market vendor to offer her better prices, or send messages via trusted servants to ensure she was safe on certain paths. He began introducing small gestures that signaled his presence without overwhelming her. Each act was carefully considered. He wanted Martha to regain confidence slowly, to know that there was someone on her side, someone who recognized her strength and her humanity. Martha, meanwhile, continued her routine, unaware of Samuel's quiet support. She noticed subtly that some interactions seemed easier, some people less hostile, though she could not pinpoint why. Life remained difficult, but the small, almost imperceptible changes gave her glimmers of hope. She began to think, perhaps, that not everyone in the world was cruel. Perhaps there could be kindness, even in the smallest forms. As the weeks passed, Samuel's fascination with Martha grew into something deeper. He admired her resilience, her ability to maintain dignity despite relentless adversity. He thought often about how different life could be if someone like her were protected, if she were treated with the respect she deserved. He considered introducing himself, but he hesitated. He wanted her to see him not as a savior, but as a person who valued her for who she was, not for her vulnerability or the sympathy she might inspire. In the quiet moments of the evening, when Samuel returned to his ranch, he reflected on the injustice he witnessed daily. Martha's suffering was a mirror of the world's cruelty, a reminder of how easily society could punish those who were different or alone. Yet, he also saw hope. Martha's strength, her courage in facing the daily abuse without losing herself, was inspiring. He resolved that he would find a way to make a difference, and not just for her, but perhaps as a statement against the cruelty of the town itself. By the end of part 1, the stage is set. Martha continues to endure daily hardships, her life filled with quiet sorrow and bravery, while Samuel, the wealthy rancher, begins to take notice. The town remains cruel and unyielding, but a small spark of change has been ignited. Both characters are poised for transformation, Martha through the possibility of safety and respect, and Samuel through the call to intervene, protect, and connect with someone who has faced undeserved suffering. Their paths are about to converge in ways that neither could have anticipated, setting the scene for an unfolding story of courage, kindness, and the slow emergence of hope. After weeks of observing Martha from afar, Samuel could no longer remain a mere bystander. Every morning, as he rode along the edge of his ranch, he would see her walking carefully through the streets of the town. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle fear in her eyes. The town treated her with relentless cruelty, and he knew that without intervention, her life would continue to be filled with hardship and humiliation. Samuel was a man used to taking action. His wealth gave him power, and he decided he could use that power to help Martha, though he wanted to do so in a way that respected her independence and dignity. At first, Samuel thought of small ways to offer support without drawing attention. He sent his trusted servant, Thomas, to the market during the times Martha usually visited. Thomas would quietly make sure the vendors treated her fairly and that no one could insult her without consequence. When he saw Martha struggling to carry her basket or negotiating prices, Thomas would discreetly assist her. Martha, of course, did not know that these acts were orchestrated by Samuel. She noticed only that some interactions seemed easier than before, that some people no longer dared to whisper cruel comments. This small change gave her a tiny but important relief, and she began to wonder if someone in the world could care for her. Samuel spent hours planning his next steps. He had seen enough injustice in the world to understand that wealth alone could not protect Martha completely. He needed to be careful. He did not want the town to view him as someone seeking attention or trying to control her life. Instead, he wanted to demonstrate that Martha deserved respect, that she could live without fear, and that kindness could exist even in a place filled with judgment. His careful thought was unusual for someone of his wealth and influence. Many would have acted boldly and publicly, but Samuel's approach was patient. He wanted to make sure that Martha's dignity remained intact and that she could choose to accept help on her own terms. One evening, Samuel decided to visit Martha's house in person, though without announcing his intentions. He rode slowly on horseback, watching her garden from the edge of the path. Martha was tending to her small vegetables, her hands covered in soil, her face serious and focused. Samuel observed silently, admiring the way she moved with quiet purpose, even in a world that seemed determined to make her life miserable. He realized that he was beginning to care for her not just because of her vulnerability, but because of her strength. Her courage and persistence in the face of constant cruelty were inspiring. The next morning, Samuel arranged for a small, thoughtful gesture. He sent a basket of fresh fruit and bread to her doorstep, accompanied by a note. The note was simple, respectful, and careful not to alarm her. "I hope this helps ease your day. You deserve kindness and respect." Samuel. When Martha found the basket, she was startled. She had never received a gesture like this from anyone in town. At first, she was cautious, wondering who could be behind it. But after reading the note carefully, she felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. Someone cared, and it was not a fleeting act. Over the following days, Samuel continued his quiet support. He would ask Thomas to ensure that her path to town was safe, that no one could harm or insult her. Slowly, Martha began to notice these protections. She began to feel a small, unfamiliar sense of security. For the first time in months, she felt that she might be able to move through her world without constant fear. She started leaving her house with less hesitation, walking with a little more confidence, though always cautious. It was during this time that Samuel made the decision to approach her directly. He understood that no amount of distance or anonymous gestures could replace the presence of genuine care and respect, but he also knew he had to be careful. Martha had been hurt and humiliated repeatedly, and she might be wary of anyone who suddenly showed interest in her life. He wanted her to see him not as a savior, but as a person who recognized her strength and wanted to offer friendship and protection. When Samuel finally approached Martha, it was in the garden at the edge of his property. He rode slowly and dismounted, keeping his distance at first. Martha, startled, instinctively stepped back, her eyes wide with caution. Samuel raised his hand slightly, signaling that he meant no harm. He spoke softly and politely, introducing himself as the rancher from the nearby property. He told her that he had noticed her struggles in town and wanted to ensure she was safe. He explained that his intention was not to interfere with her life, but to offer support and friendship, should she choose to accept it. Martha was hesitant. She had been betrayed and judged so many times that trust did not come easily. But there was something in Samuel's manner that was different. He did not demand anything, he did not pity her, and he did not try to control her. He simply acknowledged her pain and offered protection. For the first time, Martha felt the possibility of someone seeing her as a person, not as a subject of gossip or cruelty. After a long pause, she nodded, cautiously accepting his offer of friendship. Their early conversations were slow and careful. Samuel did not push. He asked gentle questions about her life, her garden, her small routines, and her dreams. Martha, in turn, shared small details, though she remained cautious. She told him about her late husband, her life in the town before his death, and the daily challenges she faced. Samuel listened attentively, without judgment, offering small reassurances. Over time, a delicate trust began to form between them. It was a trust built not on romance or obligation, but on respect and understanding. Samuel also began to use his influence subtly. He spoke to the townspeople in ways that made them more cautious around Martha. He reminded them of his authority and his expectations for fair treatment. Rumors began to circulate that the wealthy rancher was watching closely, and the most cruel among the townsfolk started to ease their harassment. Martha noticed the change and felt a growing sense of relief. It was not that the cruelty vanished entirely, but it became manageable, and that made a huge difference in her daily life. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel continued to build his relationship with Martha slowly. He invited her to visit the edge of his ranch, to see the animals and the open fields. Martha was initially hesitant, fearing judgment or danger, but Samuel's careful encouragement helped her feel safe. She discovered that she could move freely without fear of harassment, and that freedom began to heal some of the wounds that the town's cruelty had inflicted. Walking through the open fields, tending to small chores on the ranch, and simply being seen as capable and respected gave her a new sense of confidence. Samuel, in turn, found that his concern for Martha grew into a genuine affection. He admired her strength, her ability to endure hardship without losing her dignity, and her quiet courage. He realized that helping her was not merely an act of justice, it was also a connection that filled a void in his own life. Both of them had known loss and loneliness, and in each other they found understanding. Their interactions were simple, filled with shared stories and careful observation, but there was a growing bond, built on respect and mutual recognition. By the end of this period, Martha had begun to change. She still faced challenges in the town, still endured moments of cruelty, but she no longer felt completely alone. Samuel's quiet protection and respect offered her a lifeline, a chance to reclaim some control over her life. For Samuel, the act of helping Martha had become more than a moral duty. It was a meaningful connection, a growing friendship that promised the possibility of something deeper in the future. Part 2 ends with the two of them on the cusp of a deeper relationship. Martha begins to feel that life may offer more than suffering and isolation, while Samuel recognizes that his careful attention and patience are beginning to make a real difference. Both are poised for the next stage, the challenges and turning points that will test their trust, courage, and emerging bond. Life for Martha had begun to change, though slowly. The quiet gestures from Samuel, the baskets of food, the discreet protection in the market, and his gentle, respectful words had begun to make a difference. She walked with slightly more confidence, her steps lighter, though still cautious. Yet even with Samuel's careful intervention, the town had not forgotten their cruelty. Rumors still spread, whispers followed her, and some people continued to look down on her with disdain. Martha had grown accustomed to enduring, but every insult and judgment reminded her of how lonely she truly was. One morning, as Martha walked to the market carrying a basket of vegetables, a group of men blocked her path near the fountain in the center of town. They were young, loud, and cruel, taking pleasure in mocking her. "Don't you have a husband to clean up after you?" one sneered. "The poor widow can't even carry her own basket," another shouted. A crowd gathered, more curious than protective, laughing quietly and whispering cruel remarks to each other. Martha's heart sank, but she held her head high, gripping the basket tightly and trying to pass quickly. Her hands shook, and for a moment she felt the old fear creep back, the fear she thought she had buried. But that day, Samuel was nearby. He had been watching from a distance, sensing that the townspeople's patience for cruelty was about to cross the line. When he saw Martha cornered, something inside him snapped. He rode swiftly toward the square, dismounting with authority, and stepped between her and the group of men. His presence alone startled them. He was a man known throughout the region, and even those with little respect for authority paused when confronted by him. "Back away," Samuel said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. "Leave her be." The men hesitated. Some scoffed, attempting to hide their embarrassment, while others muttered curses under their breath. The crowd grew quiet, sensing that Samuel's intervention was serious. Samuel didn't shout or threaten. He simply stood tall, looking each of the men in the eye, letting his presence convey that further harassment would not be tolerated. The subtle but powerful combination of respect, authority, and moral weight caused the group to retreat. Martha stood frozen for a moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She had not expected anyone to intervene, let alone someone of Samuel's stature. Gratitude mixed with surprise and relief, and she finally exhaled, feeling some of the weight she had carried for months lift, if only slightly. Samuel offered her a small nod, acknowledging her strength and resilience. She felt seen, not as a victim, not as a subject of gossip, but as a human being worthy of protection and respect. After the incident, Samuel accompanied Martha back to her house, walking slowly beside her. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. That day, Martha began to trust him more deeply. She realized that he genuinely cared, not because he wanted to be seen as heroic, but because he valued her dignity and wanted to ensure her safety. It was a new experience for Martha, being cared for without conditions, without judgment, and without pity. Over the next few weeks, Samuel's involvement became more noticeable. He began inviting Martha to his ranch, suggesting that she might enjoy the open space, the animals, and the work that could take her mind off the town's cruelty. At first, Martha was hesitant. She feared gossip, feared judgment, and feared becoming dependent on someone else. But Samuel encouraged her gently, without pressing, emphasizing that she was free to come and go as she pleased. Martha's first visit to the ranch was a revelation. The field stretched wide and open, the air was fresh, and the animals were calm and welcoming. Samuel introduced her to the ranch hands, who were respectful and courteous, a stark contrast to the town's hostility. She felt a sense of freedom she had not experienced in months. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe without the weight of constant judgment pressing down on her. She discovered that she could work alongside the ranch hands, feeding the animals, tending small gardens, and even helping organize supplies. Her confidence grew with each passing day. As Martha spent more time at the ranch, Samuel and she began to share deeper conversations. They spoke of their pasts, their losses, and the quiet hopes they had tucked away. Martha shared memories of her late husband, of the small joys and simple happiness they had known before misfortune struck. Samuel, in turn, spoke of his parents, the ranch he inherited, and the loneliness he had felt despite his wealth. Their conversations were filled with honesty and vulnerability, creating a bond built on trust and understanding. One afternoon, while walking through the orchard, Martha confided in Samuel about the daily harassment she still faced in town. Samuel listened attentively, not interrupting, not offering unsolicited advice but simply acknowledging her feelings. "You should not have to endure this," he said quietly, his tone filled with concern. "No one deserves to be treated with cruelty." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that Martha had not experienced in a long time. She felt her heart lighten slightly, knowing that someone truly understood her pain. Their growing bond did not go unnoticed. The townspeople began to whisper, some with curiosity, others with judgment. "Why does the rancher spend so much time with her?" they asked. "What does he see in that widow?" Martha heard some of the whispers, and at first it made her uneasy. But Samuel's calm presence and respect reassured her. He never demanded explanations, never sought to change her life forcefully. He allowed her to navigate the town and her own life at her own pace, offering protection and friendship without imposing control. One day, the town's hostility escalated in a different way. A few neighbors, annoyed by Samuel's influence and Martha's growing confidence, tried to sabotage her small business. They spread rumors about the quality of her produce, hoping to drive customers away. Martha felt the familiar pang of despair, but this time she did not face it alone. Samuel calmly intervened, speaking to the townspeople about fairness and respect. He did not humiliate them. He simply reminded them of their responsibility to treat others justly. Slowly, the town began to realize that Martha was no longer defenseless. Martha herself began to change. She discovered a new strength within herself, fueled by the knowledge that she had an ally and by the small victories she achieved on her own. She learned to stand her ground, to speak with quiet authority when necessary, and to navigate the town without fear overpowering her. The combination of Samuel's support and her own determination created a shift in her demeanor. People began to notice that she walked with more confidence, that her eyes no longer avoided the gaze of strangers, and that she carried herself with a dignity that demanded respect. Samuel continued to provide subtle support, always careful not to overshadow Martha's independence. He would invite her to the ranch for short visits, allowing her to enjoy moments of peace and freedom. They shared meals together, worked side by side on small tasks, and spent hours talking in the quiet of the fields. Their relationship grew slowly, built on shared experiences, respect, and the knowledge that both had endured loss and hardship. Samuel admired Martha not for her vulnerability but for her resilience, and Martha began to see Samuel not just as a protector, but as a companion who valued her for who she truly was. The turning point in their relationship came one afternoon when Martha faced a serious challenge in the town square. A group of men, emboldened by their sense of superiority, tried once again to humiliate her in public. This time, however, Martha did not cower. Samuel was present as always, but he did not immediately intervene. Instead, he watched as Martha, with quiet determination, spoke firmly and clearly, refusing to be intimidated. Her voice carried authority, and the crowd, surprised by her confidence, fell silent. Samuel stepped forward only when it became necessary, reinforcing her position with his presence, ensuring that the harassment stopped completely. That day marked a significant moment for both of them. Martha realized that she was capable of defending herself, and that she could rely on Samuel not as someone who solved her problems for her, but as someone who supported her while allowing her to take ownership of her own life. Samuel, in turn, saw Martha's courage firsthand, realizing that his respect and patience had allowed her strength to flourish. Their bond deepened, rooted not in dependency, but in mutual admiration and understanding. By the end of this period, Martha's life was beginning to transform. She still faced challenges and occasional cruelty in the town, but she no longer felt completely alone or powerless. Samuel's guidance and protection gave her the freedom to reclaim a sense of self-worth, and her growing confidence allowed her to navigate the world with a renewed sense of hope. Together, they had taken the first steps toward a partnership built on trust, respect, and the quiet power of human connection. Over the next few months, Martha's life began to change in ways she had never imagined possible. The small gestures of kindness from Samuel had grown into a steady friendship, built on trust, respect, and understanding. She spent more time at his ranch, walking through the fields, tending to the animals, and helping with small chores. Each day spent in the open air, free from the judgment and cruelty of the town, allowed her to regain pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. She felt the weight of constant fear and loneliness lifting slowly, replaced by a quiet sense of hope and purpose. Samuel, too, felt a shift within himself. His initial concern for Martha's safety had grown into genuine admiration and affection. He appreciated her resilience, her courage, and her ability to maintain dignity despite everything she had endured. He had come to understand that helping her was not simply an act of kindness. It was a connection that brought meaning to his own life, a sense of purpose he had not known since losing his parents. He was drawn to her quiet strength, her honesty, and the way she faced the world with a mix of caution and courage. But as Martha began to emerge from her fear, the town began to react with hostility. Rumors spread that the wealthy rancher had taken a special interest in the widow. Some whispered that Martha had gained favor simply because of Samuel's wealth, while others claimed she was trying to manipulate him for her benefit. Children were taught to avoid her, and some adults scowled or muttered behind her back when she passed. The cruelty that had once been subtle now took on new forms. Martha heard these whispers, and at first, it shook her confidence. She wondered if she had misjudged the town, if the small victories she had experienced were only temporary. Samuel noticed the change in her demeanor. He saw the way she flinched at whispers, the way she hesitated when walking past certain houses, and the small signs of fear creeping back into her eyes. He realized that, despite the progress, she still needed reassurance and support. But he also understood that Martha was not a passive person. She had endured far too much to be controlled or dictated to, and any attempt to force her comfort or obedience would only push her away. So he continued his careful approach, offering protection and guidance without overstepping, allowing her to regain strength on her own terms. One afternoon, Samuel suggested that Martha accompany him to a distant part of the ranch where a new herd of cattle had arrived. It was an opportunity for her to see the open land, to experience freedom away from the town, and to engage in work that was meaningful and rewarding. Martha hesitated at first, aware that the town would gossip about her absence. But Samuel's calm encouragement and gentle insistence reassured her. She realized that she had earned the right to step outside the town's judgment, to reclaim moments of peace and joy for herself. At the ranch, Martha's confidence grew further. She learned to feed the animals, mend fences, and even manage small tasks independently. Samuel watched her carefully, offering advice only when necessary, allowing her to discover her own capabilities. She began to speak with authority to the ranch hands, her voice steady and confident. It was clear to Samuel that she was transforming, growing stronger not just in body but in spirit. The woman who had once walked cautiously through the town, flinching at every harsh word, now moved with purpose and assurance, guided by her own strength and bolstered by his quiet support. Their conversations deepened as well. They shared stories of their pasts. Martha spoke of her late husband, the small joys and sorrows of her married life, and the hardships she faced after his death. Samuel recounted tales of his parents, his childhood on the ranch, and the loneliness that came with wealth and responsibility. They laughed at small anecdotes, shared quiet moments of reflection, and began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. Their bond was growing, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the recognition of each other's strength. Despite their growing closeness, challenges remained. The town continued to react with suspicion and resentment. Some people attempted to undermine Martha, spreading rumors or making veiled threats. Others tried to isolate her socially, ensuring she remained on the margins. These pressures tested Martha's resilience, forcing her to confront old fears and insecurities. But this time, she did not face them alone. Samuel's presence provided a safety net, a reminder that she had an ally who respected her, believed in her, and valued her for who she truly was. One day, a particularly cruel attempt by the townspeople forced Martha to confront her fears directly. A neighbor, emboldened by the gossip surrounding her relationship with Samuel, tried to publicly humiliate her in the marketplace. Martha felt her old fear rising, her heart pounding in her chest. But she remembered the strength she had discovered at the ranch, the lessons she had learned from working alongside Samuel and the ranch hands, and the quiet confidence she had begun to build. She stood tall, looked the neighbor in the eye, and spoke calmly but firmly, refusing to be intimidated. Samuel, watching from a distance, approached only when necessary. His presence reinforced her authority, ensuring that the harassment ended without violence. The townspeople were surprised by her courage, and some began to reconsider their behavior. They could see that Martha was no longer defenseless, that she had regained her strength and would not tolerate cruelty. It was a turning point, not just in how the town viewed her, but in how she viewed herself. She realized that she had the power to navigate her world with dignity, supported but not defined by Samuel's protection. As Martha's confidence grew, so did her feelings for Samuel. She began to recognize the depth of his care, the patience he showed, and the respect he consistently demonstrated. She felt a sense of security and companionship she had never known before, and this slowly transformed into affection. Samuel, too, found his feelings deepening. He admired her resilience, her courage, and the grace with which she faced life's challenges. Their bond was no longer just about protection or support. It had evolved into something more profound, a connection built on trust, respect, and genuine care. Samuel's patience and respect allowed their relationship to develop naturally. He never rushed Martha, never pressured her into accepting his help or affection. Instead, he offered opportunities for her to experience freedom and independence, guiding her gently while allowing her to take ownership of her own life. Martha, in turn, responded to this respect with trust, gradually opening her heart to the possibility of love and companionship. The turning point came when Samuel invited Martha to attend a small gathering at the ranch. It was a simple event, with close friends and workers, designed to celebrate the harvest and the hard work of the ranch hands. Martha was hesitant at first, fearing the gossip and judgment that might follow her even to the ranch. But Samuel reassured her, emphasizing that she was welcome as herself, without pretense or expectation. At the gathering, Martha felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced in the town. People treated her with respect, acknowledged her efforts, and allowed her to enjoy the event without fear of judgment. By the end of this period, Martha's life had transformed significantly. She had regained her confidence, her sense of self-worth, and her ability to navigate the world with dignity. Samuel's guidance and protection had given her the opportunity to reclaim her life, while her own resilience and courage had allowed her to grow stronger than ever before. Their bond had deepened into a meaningful connection, built on mutual respect, trust, and the quiet power of shared experience. Part 4 ends with Martha and Samuel standing at the threshold of something more profound. Martha is no longer the fearful widow she once was, and Samuel has found in her a partner whose strength and spirit inspire him. The town's resistance remains, but it is less threatening now, as Martha has discovered the power within herself and in her growing bond with Samuel. Together, they are poised to face the challenges ahead, their relationship strengthened by trust, respect, and the promise of a shared future. Martha had come a long way since the days when the town judged her at every step, and her life felt confined to fear and loneliness. Her days at the ranch, filled with freedom, work, and companionship, had given her a new sense of purpose. Her confidence grew each day, and her dignity, once battered by constant cruelty, was restored. She was no longer a passive figure in her own life. She was a woman who had faced hardship, endured suffering, and emerged stronger and wiser. Samuel watched Martha's transformation with admiration. He had witnessed her resilience, her courage, and the quiet determination with which she rebuilt her life. But his admiration had grown deeper over time. He realized that he had come to care for her not just because of her past suffering, but because of who she was, her strength, her kindness, and the way she faced life with unwavering dignity. Their bond, once built on protection and trust, had grown into a profound connection. It was a relationship rooted in respect, equality, and mutual understanding, and Samuel knew that he wanted Martha not just as a companion, but as his partner in life. Samuel's decision to propose to Martha was careful and thoughtful. He did not intend to surprise her with grand gestures or rush her into a choice she might not be ready to make. Instead, he planned a quiet moment on the ranch, where they could be alone amidst the open fields and the soft light of the setting sun. The moment was simple, yet filled with meaning. Samuel spoke sincerely, expressing his admiration, respect, and love for her. He emphasized that his feelings were rooted not in her past or her circumstances, but in the remarkable woman she had become. Martha listened, her heart pounding with a mix of surprise and emotion. She had grown to trust Samuel deeply, had come to rely on his presence and guidance, and had begun to feel the warmth of affection she had long denied herself. But what struck her most was his respect, his insistence that she make her own choice, that her consent and desire mattered above all else. After a long pause, filled with hope and careful thought, she accepted his proposal. It was a decision made from her own strength, her own understanding of love, and her own desire for companionship built on equality and respect. The news of their engagement quickly spread through the town, stirring curiosity, gossip, and even resentment in some quarters. Many townspeople, still attached to old prejudices, were skeptical that a wealthy rancher could genuinely care for a widow who had been treated so poorly. Others whispered that Martha's newfound confidence was somehow tied solely to Samuel's wealth. But Martha, now strong and independent, was no longer concerned with the town's opinions. She knew her own worth, had reclaimed her dignity, and was confident in the relationship she had chosen. Preparations for their wedding were simple but meaningful. Martha insisted on a ceremony that reflected their shared values and mutual respect, rather than extravagance or public display. The wedding was held on the ranch, surrounded by the natural beauty of the fields, the animals, and the clear sky above. Samuel invited close friends, trusted ranch hands, and a few townspeople who had come to respect Martha's strength and character. The ceremony was intimate, filled with sincerity, laughter, and tears of joy. It was a celebration not just of marriage, but of resilience, courage, and the triumph of kindness over cruelty. On the day of the wedding, Martha walked through the fields with a calm dignity that reflected the journey she had traveled. The woman who had once flinched at whispers and feared every step in town now moved with assurance, her head held high, her eyes bright with hope. Samuel stood waiting, his expression a mixture of admiration, love, and pride. As they exchanged vows, there was a profound sense of equality and understanding. Each promise was spoken with intention, reflecting the respect, trust, and affection that had grown between them over months of careful companionship. Life after the wedding brought its own challenges, but Martha faced them with strength and confidence. The town gradually began to accept the union, particularly as Martha demonstrated her capabilities and her resilience. She managed her own responsibilities on the ranch, worked alongside Samuel in decision-making, and engaged with the community in ways that showcased her independence and dignity. Over time, even those who had once been cruel began to recognize her strength and treat her with respect. The transformation was not just in her life, but in the town itself, as people learned to see beyond gossip and judgment to recognize character, courage, and integrity. Martha's relationship with Samuel flourished because it was built on mutual support, respect, and understanding. They shared responsibilities on the ranch, worked together to manage the land and animals, and made decisions as partners rather than master and subordinate. Samuel continued to admire Martha's resilience and insight, while Martha valued Samuel's kindness, patience, and integrity. Their companionship was a blend of love, partnership, and shared purpose, creating a life that was fulfilling, stable, and emotionally rich. The couple also nurtured moments of simple joy. They walked through the fields hand in hand, watched sunsets over the ranch, and shared quiet evenings talking by the fire. These moments, though small, were profound because they reflected a life built on respect and genuine affection, rather than fear, obligation, or pity. Martha found peace in the knowledge that she was valued, understood, and loved for who she truly was, while Samuel found fulfillment in the companionship and trust that had grown between them. Over time, Martha also became a source of inspiration for others in the town. Women who had faced difficulties sought her advice and support, seeing in her a model of resilience and dignity. Martha shared her experiences cautiously, offering guidance while respecting the independence of those she helped. She became known not just as the widow who had endured hardship, but as a woman of strength, courage, and wisdom. Her transformation was a testament to the power of patience, respect, and human kindness. Samuel, too, learned from the experience. He discovered that true strength lies not just in wealth or authority, but in the ability to recognize and support the dignity of others. His relationship with Martha taught him the importance of patience, empathy, and mutual respect. Together, they created a life that was rich not only in material terms but in emotional fulfillment, personal growth, and shared purpose. As the years passed, Martha and Samuel continued to grow together. Their partnership deepened, rooted in trust, love, and shared experiences. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but they approached them together, relying on mutual respect and understanding. The ranch became a place of stability, growth, and community, a symbol not just of wealth, but of compassion, dignity, and the strength of human connection. In the quiet moments of the evening, Martha and Samuel often stood together, looking out over the fields, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. They had both experienced loss, hardship, and loneliness, yet through patience, respect, and genuine care, they had found one another. Their story was a testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative impact of love that is rooted in equality and mutual respect. By the end of this chapter in their lives, Martha was no longer the frightened, isolated widow who had walked through the town in fear. She was a confident, respected, and independent woman, loved for who she was and admired for the courage she had shown. Samuel had found not just a partner, but a companion who challenged him, inspired him, and shared his vision for a life built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Together, they faced the future with hope, strength, and the quiet joy of a life transformed by resilience, kindness, and love. The story concludes on a note of satisfaction and inspiration. Martha and Samuel's journey demonstrates that even in the face of cruelty and adversity, dignity can be restored, trust can be rebuilt, and love can flourish when it is rooted in respect and genuine care. Their union is not just a personal triumph, but a reflection of the enduring human capacity for compassion, resilience, and the creation of a meaningful, fulfilling life.